Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the minigame podcast. Today is Friday, April 4th. We'll jump into the news after about an hour of warm-up today. I guess Yu-Gi-Oh's doing yet a 80 million downloads appreciation campaign, so lots of people still playing Yu-Gi-Oh, or at least trying it out. We'll scroll down the 24-hour peak game list here. Also, this game Repo I've been hearing a little bit about, as far as it's this kind of team-based horror game in that you're having to collect anomalies or objects and return them, or objects in general, and then there are ghosts everywhere, and then it can hear and use your microphone. Which, one of the things that I question about that is it really a question then of could you just have a team playing with the microphones muted, and then you would have a much easier experience. This is once again one of those games though that is 100% about playing with your friends and your friends making a lot of the fun there. So the big news today, I suppose, is I've managed to actually mail off the taxes I needed to fill out. So I am no longer burdened with that mess to at least that extent. I still have a whole bunch of paperwork that needs to be organized and put away, but at least that's something. PUBG has changed its icon back, or SteamDB has at least refreshed its icon, so the April Fool's Day joke is gone. But Naraka Blade Point still has the same video trailer that was, I'm pretty sure, an April Fool's Day joke, which highlights the potential problems there with doing a joke like that. Looks like we're going to keep Banana below the top 10, unfortunately. This is a game that should never have been on the top 100 in the first place, in my opinion, and still stays around with potentially 100% of everybody running this program being a bot or using some kind of botting software to run it for non-legitimate video game entertainment purposes. I don't know if a better way to say that. So yeah. It took me at least 3 weeks, I would say, to just sort through papers to see if I had everything I needed. And then it really only took me 2 days. And that's just me being slow and doing it in multiple settings. But yeah. So I am done with that for this year. I'll blink and it will be next year. And then I'll be dealing with taxes again, although who knows what taxes will look like next year for anyone. They could be drastically different. Rich people could have massive amounts of capital gains losses, which might even further reduce the amount of income being brought in via those taxes, whereas tariffs, which unfortunately we're going to be talking about tariffs quite a bit today, may be bringing in more and more revenue for the US government, but anything that comes in as a tariff is not inherently deductible on income tax. So unless there was equal measure of eliminating or reducing income tax for things you were paying on the tariffs, you are just paying more taxes in different times. And inherently it's not going to really be marked up as a tax as much as it is just going to be things are more expensive. Yeah. For the end consumer. So that's allowed me to get back to starting to focus on cleaning and decluttering and remodeling my house. As far as just, I started 2 remodel projects, and I'm in a really high danger point of neither one being 100% finished when I've done everything that I can do, or it just never getting done in the first place. But yeah, I'm trying to reorganize and clean and declutter still, and that's feels like a process that could very well just be never ending. Like, in the last house I owned, it was incredibly small, and I had the entirety of my Nintendo collection, which right now is taking up floor to ceiling 1 car's worth of a garage, just front to back, floor to ceiling. Maybe not 100% front to back, maybe closer to 60-70% front to back, but it's a lot of stuff. And that stuff was in the process for years of trying to be organized and boxed up, and it never really got 100% organized to my satisfaction. And certainly it was an overwhelming situation in my old house, which was much smaller. Now I'm in a situation where my current house is arguably too big. In fact, there is definitely an argument that if I had a lot of time and a lot of energy, that I would move the room that I mostly reside in out of a big house into a much smaller 10 by 10 foot room, which would be a little cramped, but wouldn't be completely out of believability, because right now I have a closet that really doesn't have clothes in it. Like, it's a twice as wide as the other room, and there's not even half full. If I moved my shelves of anime to a different room as far as a theater room, then those shelves would be not really being used. And then if I just compress my computer down a little bit, I would be fairly well situated there. And I have a queen size bed that could probably be turned into a full size bed, which also would reduce the amount of space there. The bed is on an electric bed frame, which I recommend everybody have one of those. It really can just change your life and prevent back pain before it happens, or help with back pain when it does happen. But yeah, the bed frame itself is super heavy and super expensive, so moving that would be very difficult. Getting it even installed was very difficult as far as getting it in the house. Yeah, that's one of the rare cases where maybe going to a mattress store and getting ripped off at a mattress store versus buying on Amazon might be worth it. In the Amazon, particularly third-party sellers, are going to hire delivery people who are going to then say, we don't go inside the house, which is a ridiculous thing. And I nearly had to say, either you bring this in the house or you take it back with the bed frame, because there's just no way I was going to be able to put it in. But yeah, that really is a project for another day if I was going to do that. And a lot of the reason why I would do that is just so I could kind of strip my current room down and just repaint the walls, which, yeah, it's not really super high priority in the first place. I could go bigger to and move into a bigger room. So, but I couldn't see any reason why I would really want to do that. That would just be taking up extra space. At a certain point, if I was doing that, I would be doing it in an effort to project more minimalism than realistically I live by just having more empty space. Waifu is a game, apparently, that has somehow made it to the 68th position of what people are playing, which still really, I think, highlights how once you get away from games that require multiple players, Furry Killer in the 54th position. Yeah, once you get away from games that require multiple players, the number of people playing a game is so small in any 24-hour period that the charts really don't have enough stability to make sense. As far as it's just not potentially giving you useful information. What's this Limbus company? This looks weird. So what else? I'm still shopping way too much. I got a HEPA filter that was a Slick Deals that says it connects to Smart Home Life, which is a misbranding of Tuya Smart Life. I got it on the risk that I would have to actually return it completely and find out that there actually is an app called Smart Home Life, which there probably is, but it's still just a Tuya device. The thing about this HEPA filter, first of all, that struck me is it was smaller than I estimated based on the pictures, but I can never really tell for size on the pictures on Amazon. It has a HEPA 14 or maybe MERV 14 being labeled as a HEPA filter on the front and back of it, some pre-filters, air intake on the front and back with a special fan blade that is designed to suck in air from the front and back and push it upward and out. But the big thing about it, compared to the HEPA filters I bought probably 15 years ago, is that it has an air quality sensor on it, which is probably, in realistic terms, a very cheap air quality system that may not really be that accurate, but I assume it's not just straight up making things up, which is almost all I really require. And because it has an air quality sensor in it, it has therefore a functionality of an auto mode on top of having like 5 different speeds, maybe 4. Maybe it's low, medium, fast, and turbo, but I think it might actually be silent, low, medium, fast, and turbo, which means it is running right now in silent mode, and I've been letting it run. It also is running off of a DC barrel jack and a transformer, so it is really more than likely a DC fan compared to the HEPA filters I would have bought 16 years ago, which I still have, and still have never once changed the HEPA filters, changed the pre-filters many times, but and these I guess don't have separatable activated carbon pre-filters like the previous ones I had did, but the filters themselves are like $35, so there's also a timer on this one that will, with the smart device, tell you after 1,000 hours to replace the filters, at which point I will almost certainly lie to it and say I did. But also it says clean the pre-filter or the dust screens once every 2 to 3 weeks, which I almost certainly won't get around to doing that, so I'm not really planning on using this anywhere to a high level. And with the sensor that tells me the quality of the air, I'm finding that the quality of the air is actually extremely good, and that there are somewhere between 5 and 7 parts per million showing up on the sensor fairly consistently. And I imagine the only time I'm going to see it pop up is if I spray Lysol anywhere, which that sets off like my gas sensors as an aerosol, or some other kind of aerosol like bug spray or something, at which point I imagine it will start to say that the air is polluted in that case. There are multiple HEPA filters you can get, one specifically labeled for toxins, and the HEPA filters are like $35, which is not that expensive. And yeah, the Slick Deals brought it down from being like an $180 device, which is way too expensive, down to being an $80 device, which with the sensor, with the smart home integration, with 2 filters included, is a very reasonable deal. I would say in my couple days of using it, the experiment is probably to buy one of these, and it says it can do 3,000 square feet. That's probably at turbo mode. But I would just buy like one and then experiment in what bedrooms or living spaces do you actually see poor quality of air consistently. And if you only are seeing it in one place, or if you're just going to put it right next to the air intake of your central cooling and central AC unit, that might be good enough. Or if you're just going to put it in like one bedroom because that's all you need, it maybe a baby bedroom or something like that, or maybe somebody who's specifically got asthma, that may be more than enough. And at a certain point, if you can get really cheap HEPA filters that don't have smarts, and then you just put a smart plug on them for an extra $20, that might be the smarter move, to just straight up say, hey, do more filtering everywhere. I'm still debating on the idea of trying to have a Tuya central AC thermostat controller, at which point if this sensor detected poor air quality, maybe you just tell the fan of your whole house to turn on and filter the air while that's happening too. I do have a bathroom exhaust vent I also want to install at some point, and same thing, it would make a lot of sense to turn on a bathroom exhaust vent and just suck out the bad air if a sensor tells you. But yeah, I would say definitely get one while it's on sale, and maybe not go crazy on getting a whole bunch. But there certainly would be an argument to having one in every bedroom just to make people happy. It's weird because it's like a sideways device too, in that the back and front suck in all the air, so you're never going to really want to put the back side directly against the wall, or even the front side against the wall if you don't want to see the screen. Although it does have a night mode, and I'm not sure what the sleep mode really does, as far as does it change the speed down to being slow, or does it just turn off the screen on the front. I haven't really figured that one out yet. But yeah, it's a weird sideways device. And then I started to say, and then changed the topic, in that it has a DC motor in it, which probably means it's much more efficient and uses a lot less electricity than the 120 volt HEPA filters I had from 16 years ago, which I've had them, but I've not really been consistently using them and turning them on. They've been sitting in a garage for many of those years, and mostly I only expect them to try and help collect dust and remove dust from the air, which I have since then been suggested by YouTubers that the best way to collect dust is to literally just have consistently vacuumed floors and or mopped hardwood tile floors, because a mopped hardwood tile floors that's just like consistently being mopped has kind of a static cling to it, and so the floor will just gather way more dust than anything else as long as it's somewhat clean and consistently clean. So a robot vacuum might really be way better, and it almost certainly would be more appreciated than a HEPA filter would be. I think the filter is called a Yeti. And might as well brought it up on the browser. Let me see if I can actually do that and just show it instead of just telling. Like, I need to definitely get better at that. See if I can just Google. I'm not even sure how any of this actually works when you're trying to search. Let's see. Well, immediately in searching, you get a bunch of Govee products. So here's a different brand that looks like it is almost exactly the same external packaging for $50 on the limited time deal, but it does 1,250 square feet, and it's a HEPA 13 instead of a HEPA 14. So here's one for $75 too, so that it may very well be that I just paid the normal price and thought I was getting a deal, which is typical. Here's a almost certainly the exact same device, once again being rebranded for this time $100. Yeah, in a lot of cases I imagine these are the exact same chip inside in just different plastics, different parting out of the motor, which is really the best thing, and a different system that would just lock you into it. The different filter settings, like, which, yeah, 16 years ago that was a big deal too, is you buy the wrong HEPA filter, particularly if you're buying like a Dyson or something, and you then are going to just get screwed on the cost of the replaceable filters. Dayette, D-A-Y-E-T-T-E is the brand name. Has this weird hex pattern, but only internal hexes actually absorb it. So yeah, it says it's 3,000 square feet, 4 fan speeds, 22 decibel mode. Right now it's running at slow. And yeah, it's got like a $70 coupon and then a promo code of 50% off, which I don't know if both of those really worked per se. Washable pre-filters to catch really large bits of dust and basically nothing else. HEPA 14, which I don't think really there is a HEPA 14, in that they've, I think, really just changed it back to the MERV rating of 14, MERV, and then it does work with the 2-year Smart Life, which is the big deal, certainly. But there are also buttons on top of it. No remote, but I don't think you really would need a remote. There are different, probably, versions if you only needed smaller square footage. Also, might save you a few bucks. But then there's also replaceable filters. There's a pet dander one. Let's see. I guess Amazon doesn't really have a great system as far as the filters themselves. So yeah, here you have the filters themselves coming in a 2-pack again because it's front and back. And maybe there's a danger here that the filters would go out of stock and or become way more expensive. But yeah, they have a little bit of activated carbon on the back of them, which seems a little weird, but I always thought the carbon pre-filter came on the front of them, but there's only one way it connects. There's a little bit of foam on the edges too. They have original versions, pet dander versions, toxin observers, and smoke removers. Now I don't have a clue what the toxin observers really do, but I would think you'd want that smoke wildfire if you're in a wildfire area. It's saying replace every 4 to 6 months, and all of them are pretty much the same price. Now, is this medical grade equipment? No. We'll definitely point that out, but if you have a little bit of asthma, if you just want better air quality, if you feel like you're having any breathing problems, something like this can at least help identify the problem. Weirdly for me, I think something like this may identify that I just have allergies, which leads to congestion at times and coughing, that I perhaps lay down way more than a normal human should. But yeah, that's my latest smart device debacle slash waste of money. Which again, we'll be talking about tariffs, so who knows how far I can go further in that direction. And frankly, I'm not sure how many more things strike me as actually necessary. In a lot of ways, buying a new HEPA filter when I already had bought ones before is just kind of going in circles, just replacing the old things, which there's nothing wrong with that. Certainly, if you're getting good use out of it. I'm just hoping I'll get good use out of it. The biggest problem I'm going to have with it is just finding a nicer place for it to be, so it's not in the middle of the walkway, which is kind of where it is here at the moment. So now that I do have taxes done, I also can now start focusing back on just cluttering and decluttering. Well, not cluttering, decluttering the house. Which I'm gonna probably take that fairly slowly. Like, I've had a bit of a refresh now after spending months and months working on it, trying to rush through it, and that didn't get to completion. So I think I'm really just gonna try and make footage, trying to continue to work on the macros, which I did a little bit of more work on that this morning. I could have streamed this morning, but really I have just been trapped by the smallest amount of success to stream later in the evenings, which, okay. Speaking of making footage, episode 1 of a 2-part quick look that's 6 hours long of Memento Mori aired on my channel earlier today, and part 2 will air tomorrow. I pushed that out and scheduled that out early just to try to be a little bit more relevant there. And I imagine I will find that that was a huge waste of time, and both videos get 0 views. Or even if they get views, the amount of watch time there will be incredibly low, just because the videos are way too long, which is going to cause the algorithm to not recommend them to anybody. But yeah, I have been playing the Shiva, which I kind of always knew that playing the Shiva. Interesting, I didn't realize I had even unlocked 2 achievements. I kind of felt like all the achievements were going to unlock at the end of the game as different endings. Anyways, to finish my thought, I kind of knew that just playing the Shiva was going to lead to me talking about religion in general and my very limited understanding of Jewish religion, and that's definitely the case here. As far as the whole experience, it is 100% Jewish. You're playing as a rabbi. Shiva is a ceremony surrounding a death. There is a murder mystery to the game, but you get to it fairly slowly, and I think it's a pretty short game too, so I think you're gonna fairly quickly resolve the murder mystery and then the game will be over. But yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that I potentially am being dragged to say. Not anything too controversial, I hope, but there's just a lot of, I guess, passion that most people in the United States will have as far as religions and knowledge there. People in the United States generally don't take religions anywhere as casually as, say, Japanese people do with their religions of Shintoism and Buddhism. Then there's just a massive amount of Yiddish words in the Shiva too, so it's a shame we don't see more like Jewish characters in video games or games around the Jewish communities, of which I would assume that there's many. But it also kind of makes a lot of sense. It would be almost the equivalent of making an Amish video game or an Amish character in a video game. There's just a lot of backstory and foundational stuff you have to do that you just don't have to do that if you create a generic, probably Protestant white guy as your protagonist, which South of Midnight, which I'm gonna play a little game today and see how many of my news sources have anything to say about South of Midnight since it has released. It's kind of a AA game. It has a weird kind of stop motion animation going on with it, which arguably you're kind of putting an anchor on a game that already had a chance of underselling just because of it being set in the American South, New Orleans like area, and having African American protagonists, which will reduce its sales to some amount. One hopes only a small amount, but some amount certainly. So then when you throw in a experimental avant-garde art style, the game could suffer even further. The reason why I'm playing the Shiva is because it's from the same creator of Blackwell Legacy and Blackwell Unbound, and his commentary of these games, which came out after this game, although all of these games are re-releases, claiming to be remasters, but I don't really feel like they are really remastering anything. But yeah, his commentary is definitely referencing the Shiva, so it made a lot of sense to take a break and play that game. But yeah, it is extremely heavily full of Jewish culture and Yiddish, to the point where you feel, perhaps a lot of people would feel just like an outsider, and a lot of people would just not give it the time of day, and I imagine that is the case as far as what this is going. just now, as I look at the thumbnail, am I realizing that the H is probably stretched out this way to represent an ark holding a Torah. And I thought maybe that was just a Hebrew lettering that was being done there, but yeah, just now I have a new theory. So yeah, that's the game I've been playing. There is also a weirdness as far as games in that the remasters that are coming out these days are very much now starting to feel like they are minimal remasters, what you might very well just call patches in many cases. The Talos Principle Reawakened in particular is one that I'm wondering if this is a game that really should have been a remaster, even though I do think Talos Principle Reawakened, which is about to be released, does have some new content. I can't help but wonder if maybe that should have just been a 5-year anniversary free update, and instead is being resold to probably the exact audience who had bought it the first time. And as a content creator, I just kind of am starting to wonder, should I focus in on playing remasters of games I enjoyed just because I'm using it as an excuse to play a game that I enjoyed again, versus going down the list of the 1,000+ games I have that I haven't covered. Perhaps, I mean, there definitely is a good argument that I should be just playing new games consistently and not going back to remasters ever, and that I should just have a blanket statement that says, with extremely few exceptions, I will not cover remasters of games I've already covered. In part of my strategy of making content and long plays on YouTube is to have contents that would be more evergreen or more relevant, at least, and that people would go back and watch videos from years ago. You are effectively fighting against that thought if you're just going back and playing the same game over and over again, or playing remasters of it. Remakes are a different thing, certainly. If you're telling me it's a straight up new game that maybe has just the same story or a very similar story to the old version of the game, but if it's in a new engine, if it's got completely different graphics, that's a different thing. But if you're telling me what you've really done is tweak some of the visuals and introduced some new shaders or ray tracing visual effects, some post-processing effects, basically, filters or things like that, it just doesn't feel too much. Les Miserables, Jean Valjean. I want to see that game. We're scrolling down this day in history, and for the most part I don't pay enough attention to when I'm actually scrolling down here. There's a lot of games certainly that have been released even on a single day, and really in a lot of ways this is only a subsection of what actually would have been released on Steam on April 3rd. But here's a thought. How do we actually get to it? You have to click 2 clicks. It's a hidden object game. That doesn't really surprise me. It is mixed reviewed. Les Miserables in particular is certainly relevant enough that it should have some kind of game, and a point and click adventure game does make a lot of sense. It can be based off the novel, which is, I believe, public domain, and not inherently have to base it off of the musical, which the music, at least in that, is probably not public domain. In fact, I'm pretty sure one of the big movie companies owns the rights to the music in the Broadway theater play. But yeah, it's also kind of a hard game to turn into anything and get people particularly interested in it. The issues are fairly abundant in Les Miserables in that you're going to mostly be tied into a tight narrative of what actually happens, and you can't really divert too much from that. So you couldn't have, for instance, the rebels fighting enemies in an RPG grinder, just fighting enemies over and over again, and without it feeling very ridiculous. You can't have Jean Valjean doing things different than what he did in the past, or doing extra things that aren't mentioned in the novels. You can't have Cassette doing things different, really. In a lot of ways, Les Miserables is part Romeo and Juliet, and then also part unique story around the revolutionary times of France. You could make perhaps a game set in that time frame, and it's weird we haven't seen too many games set in that time frame. But yeah, I'm not sure how many people would actually even care. Clearly, for a hidden object game to be so mixed reviewed, there must be some particularly low quality elements here. I did not realize you could get down to 38 cents. It's been a while since I've seen anything below 66 cents on Steam, but yeah, I think 33 cents may be the bare minimum. You have to sell something before you're just giving it away for free. Yeah. It still does definitely feel like, to me, as far as the world of video games, that there are probably many novels, I don't know if you would call them great novels or what, that have not been attempted to be adapted at all, or have been just adapted very poorly. In fact, video games, I think, just have a horrific history on that aspect, in that Dante's Inferno went over budget and was, I think many would argue, not really true to the Dante's Inferno novels. Yeah, video games in general just don't tend to stay very consistent to the original source material. But then you also get, like, American McGee's Alice, loosely based on Alice in Wonderland, and you get some unique divergence there by not being too reverent to the original story concepts. But I do think it's probably a case that video game developers either think they're more creative than they are, or are more creative enough to the point that they can read a novel, be inspired by it, and then tell their own story in a video game fashion over a longer period of time in a different way than a novel might. BioShock 1 almost certainly would have been a worse experience had it been just a literal translation of Atlas Shrugged, which BioShock 1 is loosely based on Atlas Shrugged and in general just other Ayn Randian writings and philosophies. And I'm still not 100% certain that the inspiration of being inspired by Ayn Rand wasn't more of a libertarian, actually true belief in agreement with Ayn Randian concepts originally, and then it eventually just evolved into being more of a critique of Ayn Randian concepts and policies and where it would go in BioShock. And then they did a pretty poor job in BioShock 2 with a completely different people making that game, as far as trying to convert Rapture from being a libertarian paradise gone wrong into being more of a socialist or communist paradise gone wrong. I think I'll go ahead and mention it now. Don't have anything even to say about my charts there. I saw on Reddit that 10 years later they have censored Far Cry 4, I believe. There was a scene as far as the ending in that a female character was talking to you and she was topless. They have gone back 10 years later and added a bra. There is heavy speculation that this is because $5 for Borderlands 3, but I bet it's more. They get the deluxe edition. And here's BioShock, the collection. Let me look at that. Are those remasters? The speculation is that this is Tencent's doing, which, if it is Tencent's doing, which it feels like it might be, then this would be the first instance I've heard of Tencent actually invoking any censorship. But it wouldn't certainly be the first instance of Tencent investing in a company and then doing something that gamers don't really like. That would certainly at least be Lord of the Rings Golem being shoveled out and being made in the first place. That's almost certainly Tencent's involvement. So I wonder really if like the concern around the Saudi Arabia Public Interest Fund is best to be left aside until we see any of their influence or any of the games that they have invested in or companies they've invested in doing any kind of censorship or anything negative at all, and that all that focus, for the time being at least, should be focused on the Tencent involvement, which it definitely does feel like at this point that Tencent is interfering. And this may very well be a case where the problems still exist on Steam, where games can be just updated and you can't and you just aren't having a preservation program. I was trying to figure out if this Sultan's game, if this guy here is supposed to be Cersei's, being clad in gold with nipple rings, or if he is just supposed to be a... I guess I'm gonna have to just click on the link to find out. But yeah, I was wondering if he was supposed to be like Cersei's, well, did he call himself a god emperor in the movie 300? Because that's what he really reminds me of, is that character from the movie 300, just with all kinds of piercings and gold. There's been a lot of squirrel games, squirrel with a gun being a big one. Now, I am seeing that South of Midnight is not listed here on this chart, which makes me wonder if it is not on Steam, or at least not on Steam yet. Because I would think somewhere on this front page, if it was available at all, I would have seen South of Midnight, since it did at least just come out. Weirdly, I don't really have a good system to look it up, other than the basic system, which is the only system, so just do it that way. So we will turn off my ad blocker to make all of the page look, and we'll try South of Midnight as a search. Then we'll bring up, that'll open a new page, and then we'll turn the ad blocker back on. And then I accidentally clicked on The Last of Us Part 2. Which is being received very positively, enough that I can go ahead and just take it off the follow list and put it on the wish list, since I'm already seeing it. Although, yeah, I don't know if I really am going to play it. So, yes, this game is already rated as very positive. It's not on my follow list for some reason, which how I missed it this much is kind of crazy. But yeah, 91% positivity, and it's advanced early access, so pay $10 extra to get advanced access. Which, at a certain point here, advanced access is just becoming this streamer tax, content creator tax, that is being applied specifically to non-mainstream video game content creators, whereas anybody who is affiliated with something like IGN is almost certainly going to get even more early access for free, if they're going to do any of that at all. And while I can appreciate that this game is practically going for $40, it's also a shorter game. I think it's free with Game Pass, and it is perhaps only just a slight contrast from what Nintendo has announced, which Nintendo has gotten some pushback already, as far as Nintendo fans saying bring the prices down, that is way too expensive at $80. Yeah, scrolled away. Also very positive. I guess the question I'm going to have to ask myself at some point is, how many squirrel games do I really want to play, and how silly do I want the squirrel games to be? This one might be a good one to consider playing, in that it is more of a crafting and building tree houses game and not just squirrel with a gun and silliness. Although squirrel with a gun may actually have more standard video game elements to it, where this may be more of a cozy, simplistic game. Sultan commands you to play a cruel game each week. You draw a card and have to complete a challenge within 7 days, forced to make dreadful choices to beat the Sultan's game and save your own life. You'll have to find a way to survive, not just the game, but its consequences too. Okay. It's inspired by the 1001 Nights story. One of those stories, of course, being Aladdin and the 40 Thieves, I believe, or Aladdin as it's called in modern times. So yeah, I don't think this is specifically supposed to be Cersei's. The game allows the player to choose between killing or indulging their desires. There are only textual descriptions of the outcome, no graphics, no description of the process. Interesting. Interesting way to phrase things too. And I assume YouTube family friendliness doesn't extend to males with pierced nipples being too offensive, but really don't know for certain. Then let's see what Borderlands really cost if we were to get the deluxe edition. $16 to get the season pass and digital deluxe extras, character skins, weapon trinkets, and more. And if I was going to buy the Borderlands collection, Pandora's box, I'd probably get a lot of extra content that I don't actually need. If you're going to buy the Ultimate Edition, it's $23, so yeah. Which I think the default would be the Ultimate Edition as a thought. But the Bioshock collection is just a bundle of the existing Bioshock remastered re-releases. I'm still not sure that I ever did the Bioshock Infinite DLC content that it had. Burial at Sea 1 and 2. Yeah, I may very well have never played that. And don't feel particularly motivated to play it even now. Alright, so there was a brief moment there for a couple days where we were seeing refurbished Steam Decks be in pretty good stock. That stock seems to have run out. I can't help but assume that at least a few of those sales were due to the pricing announcement of the Switch 2 being $450. In particular, another consideration that occurred to me is at the price point of $450, while you can't probably get a PS5 Pro, you probably can get a PS5 at $450, or at least a PS4, which, while it doesn't have that mobility factor and doesn't have Nintendo games, would probably have more powerhouse games. That being said, I wouldn't really recommend a PS5 or PS4 because there's really no PlayStation exclusives that really stand out, and for a cheaper price you can still get either a brand new or a refurbed Steam Deck OLED. And if you want to go relatively really cheap, you can even get the LCD versions of Steam Decks refurbished for basically half the price. Of course, none of that is going to help you play Nintendo games, which is what Nintendo, I assume, is hoping that the games really sold to switch to, and I'm not really sure they did, since they were also announcing a price increase on everything. I did hear that Mario Kart, since I wasn't really paying too much attention to all those announcements, Mario Kart seems to have some kind of open world elements to it, in that you drive up to the start of races, and then there is kind of like an open world section there, although it's not going to be particularly much. I imagine it's probably just going to be, there's a road that maybe loops around to many different start points for races, which in other games that have done that, while that might be slightly immersive, it also is almost always skipped, and there's usually a system to just immediately jump to the start point of a race, and not engage with the open world element. Yeah. Meanwhile, as far as the games people are playing on Steam, Schedule 1 and Repo still surprising on the list, and yeah. I don't know if South of Midnight would even qualify to be on this list as a early access game. I wouldn't be surprised if Valve does start to kind of crack down on early access and says, hey, if your game is not actually available for purchase for everyone at the price that you actually say the game is selling at, then we're going to at least punish you by not allowing you to be on our list. So it's this haste game. Feels like this is the yet another infinite runner that has caught people's attention, which, yeah, not particularly surprising. This one is perhaps more surprising. This one they were giving away for free as a free-to-play game. It's already in my library. People are apparently playing that quite a bit. Last of Us Part 2 Remastered came out, and again, it's a PlayStation first title that probably should be knocking people's socks off, and yet there's just too much stuff to talk about. And I guess here new also implies that something left the list and came back to it, because I seriously doubt Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is new to this list for the first time. Devil May Cry 5. Imagine these games kind of just drop down and then drop back up based on whether people are playing it or not. So yeah, the new label clearly feels like it could be a little deceptive. Hello Kitty Adventure Island still doing strong, and Disney Dreamlight Valley doing strong. In a weird way, the Steam Deck might be fairly friendly to the, for lack of a better term, more feminine gamers out there. I don't want to inherently just call them girl gamers, but yeah. Balercho in the first place. Yeah, I was also thinking about how I used to make content when I first started my channel, and I would just do like 100 episodes of Binding of Isaac, and then around the 100th episode or something I would say, hey, you know what, I'm a little burned out, let's move on to the next game, is how that went. And yeah, in modern times I would just not really imagine I would do 100 episodes of anything. Maybe Binding of Isaac, Repentance or something, but yeah, just the laid back, I'm actually just going to play this game. Binding of Isaac in particular was the pinnacle example of taking way too long to play a run through. But yeah, YouTube is not Twitch, and it never really adopted an audience like the Twitch fans, of as far as people wanting to watch you play long plays all the way through, even though that's still really what I'm doing. It's interesting how the link there had Dead Space in it as far as the Steam Deck, and then the games being highlighted here are pretty much exactly that same chart. But Dead Space is not even included in that. They haven't really done anything with the Steam Dock either, which there definitely is room for improvement there. Like if they came out with a new dock that had a NVMe port in it where you could put expandable storage to it, or a USB plug in it to plug in an external spinning hard drive, that would show more focus on having expanded storage, which I'm not sure how many Steam users actually need that. If it had a Thunderbolt style PCI Express or USB 4 connection that could put out even faster, better quality video as an improvement, that could be interesting too. But I wouldn't be surprised if it is a case where if they're going to come out with a Steam Deck 2 docking station or a Steam Deck docking station 2, they would not put that out until they announced a Steam Deck 2. But yeah, there's definitely some room for improvement, I think, in the docking concept overall. It is very weird that there is just not a USB plug on the bottom of the Steam Deck, and that there isn't a headphone jack at the bottom of the Steam Deck. Although honestly, if they got rid of headphone jacks completely and just put another USB thing where you could plug in USB headphones, which is where we're going certainly in the future, that too would make some sense. Just say, hey, we've got 2 USB-C ports on the bottom. One we are suggesting is for a headphone jack. One we're suggesting as something that can be used for docking the device. I also wonder, now that the Switch 2 has announced a camera, if it's going to potentially start to make a little bit more sense for there to be a USB-C adapter at the top of a Steam Deck that would introduce camera and chat functionality, which, you know, you could already do that and make a device without having to change anything else. There is perhaps something interesting on the idea of having a camera on a table in front of you while playing a handheld device. But by the looks of it, it also definitely feels like it's a case that the camera that Nintendo has announced is going to be a very poor quality camera, and the streaming service itself is going to be very limited and low quality. Alright, well, I don't even know if we really have been warming up for the past hour versus actually just talking about video game news. Yeah, I don't think there's too much other warm-up I could say. I'm still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. They're doing a sneak peek event right now for the Wonder Picks, which probably sounds like nonsense to a lot of people, but what it basically means is there's a Wonder Pick system where it has a currency where you have a 1 in 5 chance of picking any one of 5 cards. Very possibly you'll be in situations where you want only one of those 5 cards, and so it is a pick a card, any card type situation. Well, the sneak peek event gives you a pretty decent chance that you can take a sneak peek at one card and reveal it, and if it is a card you want, then you would select it and take it. If it's not the card you want, which there's still a decent chance that that is the case, you now have at least a 1 in 4 chance of getting the card you want by selecting one of the other options, which means the hourglasses for Wonder Picks that you could have been collecting from day one now have slightly more value, and so you should be spending as many hourglasses that you have during the sneak peek event. The game never made any indication though that there was going to be a sneak peek event, and I think they are really just throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. Speaking of sticking, I had used this doubled sticky back tape that had come with these acoustic pegboard foam things that I'd stuck to my ceiling, and I'd put up I think 25 panel tiles originally. 2 of them fell down within the first couple days, and then it's been 3 or 4 weeks and it felt like everything was doing well. Well, in the middle of the night, 1 more fell down. It's still a pretty good turnout, and I'm only using 1 of the stickers, and you really were supposed to have used 2. I used like 4 in each corner, which made more sense to me for the first 4 sticker tiles, so those almost certainly would never fall down. But yeah, I am learning. That being said, it falling down didn't harm it. It is just basically foam, and it's not a brittle foam. It's strong enough and bouncy enough so I can either replace the sticker completely or even try and just shove it back up there and see if it sticks further. It does feel like, since these are designed to be vertical on the wall and not like horizontal or flat on a ceiling, does feel like 1 would have worked if it was vertical on the wall. And yeah, it does feel like 2 will work on the ceiling just fine. But it is still mostly working. The only thing that could really go wrong is that if I, over the course of the next few weeks, find even more fall down, and at which point I would just use liquid nails to permanently fix them. But the idea of using the sticky backed stickers effectively is that you could pry it down if necessary and do minimal damage to the ceiling, although in reality I could do medium amount of damage to the ceiling anyways. The ceiling is not good, that's why I'm putting these panels up in the first place. The only thing I wouldn't want to do is rip the paper on the plasterboard down, or rip massive amounts of what is it? They spray on ceilings. Forget it, what it's called. But yeah, that fell down. But I'm still in the middle of that project anyways. And so, as long as all of them don't fall down, or consistently just fall down, I'll eventually just replace the ones that do fall down, and eventually everything will stay up. My bigger concern is going to be cutting the edge pieces, which I am fairly certain just a nice sharp razor will do a real nice cut there, but I'm not 100% certain, and I can't really do any of that until I actually get the walls patched and painted, which is something I'm probably going to hire somebody else to do because I have no skill there. Otherwise, as far as back to video games, playing Memento Mori still, Pokemon TCG Pocket on my phone, playing way too many games on my cell phone, really. I could see maybe trying a series where I do the dailies on Memento Mori, but I couldn't imagine that would be very good, nor do I think that would help my channel in any way. It's a thought. If I was just going to be super focused on Memento Mori, and then I'm still playing Magical Modica, etc., whatever the actual name of the game is, and spending a lot of time on that, which, yeah. I do think I also confirmed that my network is getting bottled down when I'm running backups, and I'm gonna reduce the amount of compression going on there and try again. Unfortunately, before we get into the news, I am gonna have to take a bathroom break, so I'll be back in about 10 or 20 minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I had tried to avoid a bathroom break, but I clearly have very little control, if any, over that. Let me just turn down my ceiling fan. Getting a little chilly. You'd be surprised how the just pressure drops of the outside, whether it's raining or whether it's sunny, outside affects the internal feeling of a room, even if it is just maintaining the exact same thing, the same temperature. It's not pressure drops as much as it is relative humidity, is the right phrase to use. Alright, well, so then I guess we are ready to go through the video game news now, proper, as far as Video Games Chronicle. I did run my macro today, and generically speaking, these are going to be the results of my macro, but I also know my macro missed some things, so I'm going to be willing to compromise a little bit, so apologies if we miss some news stories or if we end up missing some games that came out on Steam. One of the problems with my macro is that I need to sanitize a single quote mark. A lot of Video Game Chronicle news stories use the single quote mark, and I need to sanitize it in UI Vision by adding a backslash in front of it before trying to send it off and use it later to click on links and open up tabs with that name. I'm trying a different duplicate auto closer plugin also on Firefox, because what I'm trying to do here is experiment with not using the containers feature, which feels like it's a somewhat unique and experimental feature for Firefox, in the thought that maybe the containers feature specifically is causing some of the problems with UI Vision, although inherently I think we have to lay almost all the problems at the feet of the developer of UI Vision, just not caring or having the ability to convert to Manifest version 3 in a bug-free way. I also did go back and open a bunch of tabs, so we may run into duplicate stories here just to make sure I got all the news. So yeah, Video Games Chronicle. Let's see, people need to embrace change is a quote here. Donkey Kong Country Artist welcomes the new DK design. Kevin Bayless says the new look is an evolution that still respects the original. Was there a lot of pushback around this, or is this almost a false narrative that is being promoted and pushed to get away from what I had heard was the main focus, which is the price is just too high. Now, one thing I will say is that in the trailer that I paid very little attention to with Donkey Kong for the new game, is that it felt like this Donkey Kong was a little bit more aggressive and a little bit angry. And even here you can see showing of teeth, the furrowing of the brow, eyes more central. It does give off perhaps more of a realistic angry or aggressive monkey feel, but it is not something I think that I would want in a Donkey Kong game. Whereas here you have very possibly an unrealistic, anatomically speaking, smile and an unfurrowed brow on the older Donkey Kong. Now, do I care one bit that they've evolved it and added fur? No, that looks fine. Did they really change anything? No, it's still a monkey with a DK tie and nothing else really. Nostrils perhaps are slightly different here. Hairstyle slightly different. If anything, I'd say it does feel like there's perhaps a lack of detail, like you'll see in most Nintendo games, as far as you're not really seeing any palms on the skin, or possibly any nipples or wrinkles or anything like that on the skin, and that there's perhaps an overemphasis on the hair compared to what is very cartoony otherwise skin features. The ears still lack a little bit of detail, but yeah, I didn't see anything particularly weird or objectionable on the Donkey Kong Bonanza. My biggest complaint and concern with it, from my recollection, because I don't want to sit here and watch this all of it again, is that it feels like it is taking Donkey Kong and just making something like a Mario Odyssey game, and that they have effectively are going to try and make 2 or 3 video games that are going to be almost exactly the same, which isn't the worst idea in the world, really. I wouldn't be surprised if many of the levels and ideas that were in like Mario 64 ended up being put into other games other than just like Mario Galaxy. I think they've confirmed that a lot of ideas from Mario 64 were eventually put into Mario Galaxy or Mario Sunshine, whatever. I guess it would have been Sunshine after Mario 64. So maybe Nintendo has just kind of scaled up with more programmers who have more ideas, and so if they're all making generally the same kind of game, they are just trying to differentiate the games slightly by having Donkey Kong do it. But particularly since there's a history between Donkey Kong and Mario, it just feels really weird to make a game where Donkey Kong feels like he's just playing like Mario would. And even in the Donkey Kong Country aspects, there was a bit of weirdness in previous Donkey Kong games, in that the Donkey Kong of the original Donkey Kong arcade game, throwing barrels and nothing else really, just felt like he was doing a fairly different type of thing in the other games. Donkey Kong Country by Rare perhaps established a good concept of him running and jumping and collecting things. But yeah, Mario is the jump man, so you always assume Mario would jump better than Donkey Kong would. So then Donkey Kong probably should be swinging more. I could almost see him being like a Bionic Commando style character, which would be a weird reference certainly to do, where he can barely jump, he's too heavy, and he has to swing on vines to reach a lot of locations, and he's more of a strategic, calculating character as far as the maneuverability. probably wouldn't be very fun to play it that way. But yeah, I almost feel like this is a false narrative. If anybody really complains about this, and like this 3D Donkey Kong that they've used as a screenshot, I think is from the TV show or the cartoon. I don't even think it's from a game, but it might be. Switch 2's surprise minigame collection includes Guess the Frame Rate and Mario Bros. 4K. The welcome tour explains how Switch 2 works via numerous minigames. It also costs money, though, which seems insane that it would cost money for something that should be free. I think we are really just embracing an era now with the new guy in charge of Nintendo establishing himself and establishing his intention and focus, which is to make as much money as possible first and foremost, and maybe fight scalping and give the Japanese audience a little bit of a boost, which certainly doesn't spring a lot of hope for a Switch 2 OLED model coming out at a decent price, and the Switch 3 will just be very far in the future, and the hardware probably was already mostly locked down by the time the new guy was put in charge of Nintendo of Japan. So I doubt he had a lot of influence on the hardware specs, but also we're not going to see a Switch 3 anytime soon, and when we do, I still would expect that the hardware in it is going to be particularly bad. One thing in particular to keep an eye on is battery life. You could have almost certainly swapped out a bigger battery and taken a bit more of a loss on the hardware, and it just doesn't seem like he was willing to authorize that, or Nintendo in general, if we're going to treat a corporation like a person, was willing to authorize that. And so it seems to me that the confirmation has come out that the Switch 2's battery life is worse than the original Switch, and it seems to me that there's been no indication that the new Joy-Cons have anything built into them to prevent Hall effect, Joy-Con joystick drift. So yeah, it's not a particularly great offering at the moment, and there's an assumption there that Nintendo's main audience really even has 4K TVs or would be buying 4K TVs anytime soon, and that would have been even a focus. Like, you can't have it both ways. You can't try and go high specs and sell to a more elite audience and also target younger kids. And it seems like that's what they're trying to do, when clearly the Switch 2 should have been just an incremental improvement at the same price over what they are offering. GTA 5 Enhanced is coming to Xbox Game Pass. We'll leave it at that. Let's see. It's finally confirmed the Switch 2 supports NVIDIA DLSS. The graphics firm confirmed the feature following the Switch 2 Direct. Which, that's interesting, because I wouldn't have immediately assumed that there was even an NVIDIA chip in the Switch 2. Was there an NVIDIA chip in the Switch 1? That's the question. Because the Steam Deck is using AMD, perhaps a older than it should be AMD GPU. And I guess the Xbox and the PlayStation are using NVIDIA chips, but I could have sworn that there was like an ATI GPU in the Switch 1. And it's not even as much of an issue that NVIDIA chips shouldn't be in consoles. It is more of a case that NVIDIA just doesn't really care about gaming GPUs and console GPUs in particular at the moment, and would rather sell their chips for AI and Bitcoin mining. It's a custom NVIDIA processor. So Switch 1 GPU. Let's just see if we can do a quick search. There. Tech specs, system hardware for the Switch 1, I guess. See if there's a GPU. The CPU and GPUs were custom Tegra processors. Custom NVIDIA Tegra processors. So they have been all NVIDIA, I guess. Oh, I had forgotten that. The UK retailer Game exec says that physical Switch 2 games being more expensive than the digital is a quote challenge, but he agrees with the software prices, saying the games need to be more expensive. Man, boy do I hate these kinds of religious repeatings. Propaganda basically is like, how many times have we heard now just podcasters, mainstream video game journalists, and CEOs and other spokesmen for video game companies say games need to be more expensive? Like, if you repeat a lie often enough, people will just start believing it, unfortunately. And I can't help but feel like this is just that case, where I just have not been shown enough evidence to believe that that is the case, or that even such a generic phrase could ever be applied to anything. Do all video games need to be more expensive? Absolutely not. Do some video games need to be more expensive? Maybe you could make an argument for that. But I think in a lot of cases, games just need to scale down, and if we see any more news about South of Midnight or not, I think South of Midnight might be a great example of that. Here we might have a game that is particularly well received critically and might be particularly well received as far as sales, and maybe it could be used as an example as to what games should be. Shorter, a little less ambitious, probably not doing the stop motion art stuff. Particularly Nintendo games, I do not feel like need to be more expensive. Replace the word games with eggs. Would anybody agree with anybody going eggs need to be more expensive? No. There would be definitely a case of pushback there. Or replace it with gas. Would anybody agree that gasoline needs to be more expensive? No. Yeah. It is absolutely an elitist thing to even say such a phrase. Now, if you were going to be more subtle about it, you could say game development is costing more, which is really the fault of publishers and developers, though, and should not be passed along as an expense to consumers. Unfortunately, I think we might also be in a case where boycotts just don't work, and we've already been generally boycotting video games quite a bit because there just haven't been that many good ones. Valve definitely, and Steam definitely establishes that the real desire as far as sales and purchases is for games to be much, much cheaper than they are. And maybe Valve needs to come out even harder and point out that, hey, when the average game releases at $50, it gets only 10% of its sales over the first 3 years. That the vast majority of people are not willing to pay for a game at full price. And those are made up numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised if Valve could point out some generic statements that say, hey, yeah, most gamers, particularly on Steam, are not willing to pay full price. And in fact, they are willing to spend extra money to build gaming PCs or buy Steam Decks to go out of their way to wait and buy games when they are not at full price. Now, also, that kind of metric might be extremely skewed by multiplayer options, where games released on Steam specifically that have multiplayer probably are purchased at full price very often. It is weird for the UK company Game, though, to basically celebrate its own downfall, in that the sales are going to go more and more towards digital and stop people from going inside your store. Here we have speculation from Video Games Chronicle. Will Switch 2 also suffer from Joy-Con drift? We asked Nintendo. Let's see what they said. Nintendo has claimed the Switch 2's new Joy-Con analog sticks will be more durable on the Switch 1. And I guess that's the entire response. I did finally see a picture of the new Gamepad Pro for the Switch 2's back buttons. They are just where your pointer fingers would be, more than likely, when holding the grips. And they are mappable. Nothing particularly special about them. Just weird I didn't see a picture for it. Switch 2 Q&A. We asked Nintendo about your Switch 2 questions. Interesting. So they have a question here. As far as, does Nintendo expect there to be enough supply of the Switch 2 hardware at launch? Joy-Con drift. How much will Switch 2 upgrades cost in Europe? And response to that is we've not announced that info at the moment. Are any of these questions going to get answers? Not really. And so this is a pretty pointless article as it goes. Amazon Prime's 23 free games for April include Mafia Definitive Edition and the free Xbox game. So yeah, there's a list here of the games. Which, interesting to see a free Xbox game. I guess you'd have to connect Minecraft Legends, I guess is what it is, to, you'd have to connect your Amazon Prime Gaming to Xbox or Microsoft account. Amazon Minecraft Legends not particularly well received. Yeah, I guess I really do have to applaud Good Old Games Preservation Program now that Far Cry 4 has censored itself. And now, if you want to see the topless scene, I would assume you have to find a different way to play the game than just installing it on Steam. It definitely feels like when we see this kinds of censorship, particularly 10 years later, that there has been a backslide towards prudishness that has pushed censorship even further. So the fight is real. It's not just something that is happening in the minds of people like me who speak for free speech and anti-censorship. It's just that when the fight is being won, everything stays the same, so it's hard to really claim a victory. And when the fight is being lost, all of a sudden you have 10-year-old games being changed for no good reason. And I assume the post I saw has it censored on the Steam version and not just perhaps the Ubisoft Uconnect version, which is probably the same version really. And I assume it isn't just a case that it's being censored specifically for some re-release on the Switch 2 or something. The US trade group, the ESA, which is the ESA really a trade group? I mean, what's the difference between a lobbyist group and a trade group? Because I always kind of felt like the ESA was a lobbyist group, really. Trying to just, again, often prevent censorship from being actually implemented by the US government, and mostly running E3 for a long time and running ESRB in the rating system to, again, have self-rating systems instead of the government having a rating system. But yeah, they very rarely say anything publicly, let alone anything that might be considered political. Mostly, I imagine they are just your talking/bribing politicians. But the ESA has said that Trump's tariffs will, quote, have a real and detrimental impact on the video game industry, end quote. Products will likely, quote, be subject to many of the tariffs announced, end quote. Which, in case you were living under a rock, President Trump has announced almost a blanket amount of tariffs on every single country in the world, and many countries have already announced extra retaliatory tariffs on the United States, which it seems like, from what I can tell, if you do the math, the trade imbalances of those other countries are done in such a way that is going to hurt the United States way more than the United States is going to hurt the other countries. The United States mostly exporting ideas and importing physical goods way more often than the other way around. So yeah, this is weirdness to say the least. And with this new announcement of tariffs, which he's done this several times, the stock markets, which is mostly made up money anyways, have fallen a massive amount in an extremely short amount of time. And it does seem like a lot of potential actual money may have been lost by billionaires who funded and supported Trump in many ways to get him elected. So I'm sure they're not happy about that. Trump in the past has been somewhat flippant though, so perhaps he will undo a lot of these tariffs, but maybe not. There is potentially some hope, you could say, well, maybe this will just force consumerism out of the minds of every single US citizen by force, and make everybody live like people lived in the last depression, within extremely meager means and extremely small, unambitious lifestyles. But I question if that's going to happen, and it's almost certainly not a case that domestic production of things is going to just be brought back to the United States. It just doesn't seem like that would happen. Not anytime soon, not 4 years from now, not 8 years from now, not 10 years from now. If, I guess, tariffs went on for 25 years or so, then maybe you would slightly have domestic production happen. But yeah, even things that aren't actually affected by tariffs are going to start going up in price just because people can price gouge and blame the tariffs anyways. But specifically about video games, Nintendo cartridges, I think I heard, were made in Taiwan. There was definitely a tariff put on Taiwan, specifically. Consoles may very well be built in part or in whole in Taiwan also. So yeah, it makes very little sense to have had a tariff specifically on Taiwan. Yeah, and certainly if you were going to do tariffs, you should have probably thought it through and stepped it all through. I can't help but assume that Trump wants to institute these tariffs so that he can just remove them later and say he negotiated better deals with all the countries. But I'm not sure that the other country leaders are even willing to negotiate at this point. Trump may very well be creating a paradise by accident here by unifying every other country against the United States and getting every other country to work together, which won't help the United States citizens, certainly, if that's the case. But yeah, don't want to get too much into politics. But I definitely have to agree with the USA, and many times I don't agree with the USA. Yeah, get some real details. 10% tariff on all imports with countries like China, Vietnam, and Japan. With Trump calling among the worst offenders, getting larger tariffs of 54%, 46%, and 24%. So everything from China, 54% tariffed. Everything from Vietnam, 46% tariffed. Everything from Japan, 24% tariffed. Yeah, those are big numbers. Just really big numbers. And that will lead to another article in that pre-orders have now been delayed somewhat for the Switch 2 in the United States. Because of the tariffs. I feel like that story happened after this story happened, where it says Nintendo Switch 2 Amazon pre-order invites are going out now. Interesting. This is Amazon.co.uk specifically, though. So remember, Video Games Chronicle is a UK based website, so their pre-orders are not going to be delayed. Let's see, Nintendo Switch 2 first-party game sizes have been revealed, so we can figure out how big they're going to be. The storage is 256 gigabytes, which is 8 times the original Switch, but just about the average amount of size you would expect for any device these days, gaming device at least. Mario Kart World is 23.4 gigabytes, but that might be what's listed on the store as far as how much you're going to download and use on the internet. But then that 23.4 gigabytes might be compressed and expanded. But even if that was the case, I would only expect it to be expanded to maybe double the size, because what would be mostly compressed there, if it is a compressed file, would be video, which doesn't really compress that well in the first place, not in a lossless format. So yeah, you can take it on face value and say 23 gigabytes, which I question certainly how expensive the cartridges are going to be if they have to have 25 gigabytes or more space on them. Probably don't have to be that expensive though. You can basically get a 64 gigabyte SD card for like $5 these days. Donkey Kong Bonanza is much smaller at 10 gigabytes. Probably has a lot more repetitive textures than Mario Kart does. Let's see. This one is only 3.5 gigabytes. This one's only 1.46 gigabytes. It does feel like though you could probably fill up a Switch 2 with content very quickly on the first day if you downloaded just like all the GameCube games available on day one and installed 5 to 8 games available on day one, assuming there are even going to be 5 to 8 games available on day one. I can't help but feel like Mario Kart as the launch title really also is going to work, particularly as well as Mario Odyssey as a launch title did. We might also see a point where I think Mario Odyssey wasn't actually day one launch for the Switch 1, and there were some more experimental, more buggy games like 1-2 Switch released on day one, and so it could be a case that Mario Kart World is more of a buggy experimental thing and just lacks polish compared to what the next Mario game will be on the Switch 2. Or maybe they will even move away from the world and release a Mario Kart 9 a few years into the life of the Switch 2. That's a possibility too. Nintendo Switch 2 pre-orders are available in-store only at Curry's. I assume this is yet another UK shop, so that's not particularly relevant. Nintendo confirms Switch 2 GameCube games for launch, with Pokemon coming later. So there's I think I heard there's a different version of Wind Waker, that there was a Wii U Wind Waker HD version that might be more preferable, and so it feels a little weird that they're giving you the GameCube version. Yeah. And I kind of question, as far as these other games, how much people would really want to play them. Like, clearly this is the big one, and I'm not sure that the Breath of the Wild audience of Zelda are going to appreciate Wind Waker any more than the Ocarina of Time audience appreciated Wind Waker. Like, Wind Waker does just kind of stand out as feeling like a different game and looking definitely like a different game. Miyazaki promises Switch 2 exclusive Dusk Bloods won't distract From Software from single-player games. This is apparently coming exclusively to the Switch 2. I did not catch that in the initial announcement. Here we have Nintendo delays Switch 2 pre-orders in the US due to Trump tariffs. The launch date will remain the same according to Nintendo. So here you have Video Games Chronicle actually having Trump on the screenshot, and yeah, it's a shame that we have to even talk about that. Nintendo Switch 2 pre-orders are live at Argos in the UK. Apparently they also sneakily announced a Piranha Plant version of the Switch 2 camera, which I suspect may be the exact same sensor as the standard camera, and that this is just plastic molded shells around the same sensor, the same chipset. I wouldn't be surprised if it is the exact same equipment. And while this does feel more Nintendo-y, you're still going to have like a black USB cord coming out of the back of it, and maybe this won't be tiltable as much as the original camera, which that would be crazy. Yeah. Again, I really can't tell for scale here, but it feels like this sensor is so small that it really should have just been built into the Switch 2, or that it would have been a accessory that you could attach to the Switch 2 by screwing in a module and unscrewing a module. It does seem like maybe the mouth opens and closes here specifically so you can have some privacy. Of course, the microphone pickup, I guess, is coming directly from the Switch 2. Yeah. There's been no talk. They're mentioning the PlayStation iToy here. Yeah, there's been no talk whatsoever, though, that there would be any kind of extra features with that, holding up QR codes or scanning boxes or holding up Mario things. Nothing says, there's been no talk at all of any kind of augmented reality with the camera, which would be certainly a much better sales pitch, is to say, hey, we have a camera, you can use it for chat, but it also comes with Switch 2 Fitness Adventure, and in that, instead of using a ring, you are going to just do yoga and movements, and there's going to be a decent like onboard image processing chip that detects whether you're doing the movements right or wrong. And maybe that would have been too expensive a piece of hardware, but you certainly could do simplistic things like hole in the wall, where you're telling kids to just stand in certain positions and shapes to avoid getting hit by the wall. And yeah, I question if this camera even would be able to do that well. But yeah, those ideas must have been thought. Yeah, moving on, the Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome to Our Price has been revealed, with it having a price being too much. Let's see. Apparently it's $6.12 US dollars. Which, yeah, that still is too much. Let's see. Nintendo Switch 2's $450 price tag is likely influenced by Trump's tariff, experts say. And if that is true, then we're not likely going to see a price hike. But I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo hikes the price anyways. The thing about Nintendo in particular is that they are going to certainly get on board with being patriotic of Japan. So if tariffs are put on Japan in general, I could see Nintendo and other Japanese companies raising the price of everything to just specifically hurt the US consumers and the US in general. They used the screenshot twice. Yeah. And generally speaking, I just don't want to see any pictures of any real people in my new video game news, let alone the US president. Xbox Game Pass April release includes a huge RPG shooter in South of Midnight, which, okay, that is out now. Nintendo Switch 2 editions of Switch games like Zelda and Kirby cost $80. some classic titles are getting Switch 2 upgrades at a price. See, this one here is The Forgotten Land and Star-Crossed World DLC, I guess. I don't even know if I played the DLC. I probably didn't. So yeah, some of the Switch 2 editions have supposedly added a little bit of extra functionality and features, but I don't think any of them have added anything that would justify a $60 price tag. I mean, an $80 price tag. Yeah, in my mind, Switch games should be $60 at most, and even then it was pushing it because the quality wasn't really there. The time you spend in a lot of games is often not really there for the few Switch games I played. So yeah, it's pretty much solidified me at this point that I don't think I would particularly be encouraging my nieces and nephews to get a Switch 2. I think it's probably now stuck in the road where they should move over to Steam and Steam Decks. Although I was hoping that they would do that anyways. The price tag difference is now not significant at all to get a Switch 2. And I would assume that kids in general can just have richer friends that do have Switch 2s to play and borrow the occasional Nintendo game that might actually be worth playing. But also it might very well just be a case that it's time to raise a generation that just skips the Switch 2 and skips Nintendo games altogether. Miyazaki in particular, the maker of Mario games, or the guy in charge of Mario games, is probably close to retiring or dying. And at that point, there's likely not going to be any known name of who has worked on previous Mario games or Zelda games and things like that. And so it really is just going to be a whole new generation of people in charge of making Nintendo games. And for the most part, it's been a new generation of people making Nintendo games for decades now. So having any kind of loyalty or any kind of nostalgia for Mario games is something that could possibly stop being a thing. Let's see, the original Ridge Racer is coming to the Switch 2, launching a new Arcade Archives 2 series. Okay. Guess we'll leave it at that. Nintendo Switch 2 pre-orders have opened up at Smith's UK also. They just have an article for every store. Alright, here we have the Nintendo Switch 2 battery life confirmed. Still a ton of Switch 2 information today, but over the weekend I imagine it's going to start drying up more. And it's pretty poor release date for South of Midnight. It's like they really wanted it to fail, and that there's not been any real talk about South of Midnight, and plenty of the Switch 2. So the Switch 2 will contain a 5,220 milliamp hour lithium ion battery. This is a higher capacitor of than the original Switch and the Switch Lite. However, but the Switch 2 games require significantly more power. It means that it's going to run somewhere between 2 to 6.5 hours as a rough estimate. The rough estimate for the original Switch was 4.5 to 9 hours and 3 to 7 hours for the Switch Lite. Which, yeah, that is definitely something that feels like a money profit optimization choice that was made there. Basically, they could have put an 8,000 milliamp hour battery in it and had at least battery life on par with the original Switch, which is the only one you really needed to compare with. I don't think anybody was expecting double the battery life, but it wouldn't have hurt either. I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo fairly quickly also announces some kind of battery pack accessory to keep the Switch running, the Switch 2 running. And we'll have to see what the feel and the weight of the Switch 2 is, because like theoretically you could just put a shell on the back of it with a giant battery and double the battery life, although maybe that would overheat the device. In the same way that you could probably put a shell on a Steam Deck and increase the battery life if you really needed to. I definitely have heard kids complaining about the battery life of the Switch 1. So they definitely are going to be complaining about the battery life of the Switch 2 also. Madden NFL is returning to Nintendo for the first time in 13 years, which that may be a testament also of just how poor and how difficult it was to create games for the Switch. Nintendo Switch 2 Direct News Roundup here, which this is probably older news. I don't think any of this really matters at this point. Yeah, I'm already feeling sleepy. I mean, I really just woke up and I'm already feeling sleepy again. Just wake up and immediately go back to sleep. These are all stories we already covered, so I won't go over them again, which will bring us to the Gematsu articles now. Let's see. Lost Skies launches in early access on April 18th. I'm going to work. One of the things I tweaked after running my macro is finding out if there is a link to Steam that doesn't have the word Steam in it. Whereas Gematsu always has the word Steam and that is the link. Other websites don't always have it, Steam. The way I'm going to try and do that is to extract it directly from the source code. Anything that's like store.steampowered.com/app/ is going to be a link to an app. Now that doesn't inherently eliminate the possibility that there might just be some ads somewhere on pages that lead to a game being linked to that's not really part of the story. But I'll have to, that'll be fairly obvious if all of a sudden I keep seeing these old games getting opened, assuming my code works at all. I am still very much in this situation where running my code takes a little too long, and so every time before streaming I can really only run it a couple times to test. The more it succeeds, the more and more links it collects, the longer it takes. But I'm also working on speeding up the process a bit by just checkpointing and saving the progress after collecting all the links, at which point it will skip the actions of collecting new links when run a second time, which could speed things up, at least in the testing phases. On the rare occasions it doesn't work. Yeah, we are mostly, if it's just going to be game. I'm not even reading the headlines here. Creator voice interview. Here, if you want to check it out on Komatsu. Looks like it's a decent length interview. In Zoe early access sales have topped 1 million. So, yeah. It seems like that was pretty inevitable. ReZero starting life in another world, Witcher's Resurrection, is going to end service on May 30th. Yeah, I can't help but wonder if that is also what's going to happen with Madoka Magica. So it's just going to end after about a year of service at most. There is just, I think, some limiting factors that feel like there are in the game, in that as a gacha game, Magica Modica lets you only really collect 5 copies of a character, and then after you get the 5th copy of the character, I don't think anything happens there. I don't think you get any kind of currency for a 6th copy, and not. I think it just disappears in the ether, even though you potentially spent real world money on it, which that seems crazy. You would think that there would be some kind of currency it would convert back into, or that they would actively prevent you from getting a 6th copy of characters. And there's not that many characters in the first place. And they're putting out a lot of new content over the first few weeks, and that does make me just wonder if they are just rushing their whole concept out and as quickly as possible to then potentially end service immediately on it. Yeah, and I guess that's something mobile games can do, and gacha games can do a little bit better than console games or PC games. Like, you really just cannot rush out a PC game and then shut down servers that quickly. Although increasingly we are also seeing mobile games come to PC. Fatal Fury City of Wolves adds DJ Salvatore Ganacci. Is this a... Oh, he is a real world DJ. Now, I believe this was the game that also added a soccer player / football player. So it feels like Fatal Fury City of Wolves is getting really weird. Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth Trilogy for PS4 is coming to the West in 2025. Which I assume this is just a repackaging or release for PlayStation 4. It's interesting how there's still very much a delay here as far as things coming to the West and for things coming to the PS4 specifically. Yeah, I am in this weird position where I feel like I'm going to start referring to PS5 games, Xbox Series games, and Switch 2 games as modern consoles, but I don't know what you call the PS4 or the Xbox One. Spray Paint Simulator adds Xbox Series and Xbox One versions, launching in May. Holstein Kickstarter campaign is going to launch this summer. Apparently this is some kind of psychological survival horror game. Hashtag Drive Rally launches April 16th for PC. And these racing games, they show up and then they go away. It's hard to know which ones are really worth it. Let's see, we have here a link for Lumio 2. Here we have Everspace 2. And these might be somewhat duplicated tabs. Seems like that's the case. Here we have Ben Zoe, which I'm not going to make a new YouTube short on it. Here we have Bokuro. So, yeah. So, all of those tabs were repetitive. Yeah, I'm having to do more sorting than I normally would want to do. Here's Holston. Looks like it might be interesting. This might be kind of a great example of this is what Resident Evil games should be, as far as if you wanted to make something like Resident Evil instead of the much more expensive to make Resident Evil games that we are getting these days. Although it is nice to have those hyper polished graphics in Resident Evil games for the audience. Perhaps something in between this and that should be your target, just to keep things reasonable in pricing. Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma for Switch and PC have been delayed to June 5th. Okay, we'll leave that at that. Fuga Melodies of Steel 3, Fast Mode Travel and New Systems have been detailed. Girls Made Pudding launches April 10th. I'm just not going to open any links here and assume they automatically did open. S Gundam Generation Eternal launches April 16th. Ancient Magus Bride, Midsummer's Mirage, and The Journey's Dream second trailer and first screenshots. Summerfall Studio announces a roguelike deck builder called Males. M-A-Y-S. Males, perhaps. I guess that didn't lead to any other tabs being open, so I'm going to just assume there are no tabs. Rosewater from Gaming on Linux. That's a point and click. The humble choice for April 2025 has a quality list of games according to Gaming on Linux. Steam VR Beta 2.10.2 has been released with Linux VR fix and the controller and physics improvement. So we can see they are still working on VR to some extent. Sonic Rumble has been Steam Deck verified ahead of release. Okay. That sounds like good news. The PC port of Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Ship of Harkinian, has gotten a huge randomizer upgrade. Ship of Harkinian is a free community PC port of the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time from the Harbor Masters team. The massive Blair Alpha 9.0.0 release just went live with a randomizer and other major new features. One of the major new features, obviously you would still need the original ROM files of Ocarina of Time, and Nintendo would still DMCA you if you tried to play this game on Steam, or on YouTube, so it does seem like you're going to have to just straight up lie if you're going to stream this and say you're actually playing the Nintendo 64 version or the GameCube version or something like that. And then if the graphics look too good for that, you can say, well, you're doing some extra effects on your video to make it look good. Let's see. The majority of randomizer players, I assume, have always been using some kind of emulator to play the Ocarina of Time. So now the difference isn't you're not using an emulator, you're using ported code, so it should run better. But yeah, it seems like the things that aren't randomizer specific would be full NTSC support. New menu. Mac improvements. VSync, built-in time splits. They definitely seem to be focused around speed running and randomizing. Which, in fairness, if I was playing Ocarina of Time more than once, I probably would want some kind of randomization. It is interesting that even in the new versions of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they aren't promoting any idea of randomizing anything or speedrunning anything. Those are things that have been very common and prevalent for a very long time, and yet Nintendo's not embracing them at all. Command and Conquer Combined Arms gets a major update with new missions, AI improvements, and more. It's a RTS game based on OpenRA that includes Command and Conquer and Red Alert action combined in one game with plenty of extra enhancements. Spilled is a gorgeous and relaxing short game about cleaning up the ocean. I'm trying to get through these fairly quickly once again today. Indie games at the Fellows Traveler Humble Bundle are available. I think gaming on Linux is going to push me more and more to think about buying Humble Bundles, although I'm probably not going to engage with Humble Bundles that much because that pushes me to buying random games instead of games I actually want to play. Disney Epic Mickey Rebrushed has gotten a couple Steam Deck fixes, which in general it could just use, I imagine, a few fixes overall. It is very positively received. Honestly, I think Epic Mickey 1 is just a much better game than Epic Mickey 2 was, but I haven't played one, so I don't really know. And yeah, even at $27, it feels like it's a little too expensive. Let's see. Wild Keepers Rising blends survivors like Bullet Heavens with creature collection for a lot of chaotic battles. Well, I suppose I can mention I also ordered groceries and only got about 80% of what I ordered, and yet was charged for all of it, which increasingly I'm realizing that happens fairly frequently. This is like the third or fourth time I've gotten groceries delivered and food has just been completely missing, which, yeah, I've been ordering groceries for years now and not paying attention in larger batches, so I wouldn't be surprised if I've been getting screwed for years here. But now I've changed my habits and I'm going to order groceries basically every 2 weeks or so, just whenever things go on sale, and buy just the things on sale unless I absolutely need it. And then I'm going to pay a lot more attention to what actually is delivered upon versus what is charged. Let's see. Drive Rally will leave early access on April 16th with Linux support and being Steam Deck verified. Mesa graphics drivers 25.0.3 have been released with numerous bug fixes. which I assume are all going to be a little too technical for people. But it does once again point out that Linux drivers are working, particularly to get video games running more than anything else. I imagine there's very few applications that aren't video games that are running into problems these days on Linux. It's pretty solid. Prime gaming list here, and whether or not it can be played on the Steam Deck. Odd Adventure blends Alice in Wonderland and Earthbound is now in early access. Definitely feel like I've opened some duplicate tabs, and I don't think the plugin I'm using at the moment is actually auto-closing them. Earthquakes, Cockroaches, and Broken Bones Don't Stop the Hungry Horrors demo. From releasing, I wonder if that was the case that those events actually occurred by the developers. Run, Jump, and Glide at blazing speeds and haste. Sure, we've already looked at haste. Neverwinter Nights 2 Enhanced Edition has been rated Steam Deck verified, but still no official announcement that the game even exists. And then here's the Steam Deck verified roundup for early April 2025 with new and upcoming games, which I think this in particular is going to be highlighting big games or bigger games. No, I think I'm kind of wrong about that. Is there any relevance to playing this South Park game at this point? And here's perhaps the first time we've naturally come across South of Midnight. It's just in a longer list. Definitely feels like Microsoft failed to pay enough advertising to have people talking about South of Midnight when they totally should be. And perhaps this isn't a case where actual gamers should go out of their way to talk about South of Midnight and play it to sing its praises, if there are praises to be sung. Moving on to the GameDeveloper.com. Let's see, Hybe IM, that's $21 million to expand its publishing business while wielding power of K-pop. This is one we already covered. Dredge wasn't originally going to be a narrative game. An update here says that Microsoft claims it has made, quote, fair proposals to union workers after ZeniMax have authorized a strike. Did they authorize a strike or did they initiate a strike? Those are two very big differences. I thought they had initiated a strike. To authorize a strike is almost always very commonplace in negotiations, that very early the union members will vote to authorize whoever they have put in charge to negotiate on their behalf to initiate a strike when the negotiator feels negotiations call for that they've broken down and they're just not making progress. If you don't authorize a strike as a union, then you're saying, well, inherently we're just going to accept whatever is offered to us, and we're not willing to strike over any of the things we're negotiating for, which is certainly a position of weakness, and I can't see where that ever makes any real sense to do. So it's almost always the case that the members vote to authorize a strike. And I said when we first covered the first version of this that Microsoft was going to come out with some generic boilerplate statement saying that they've been negotiating in good faith. here they are saying something slightly different and saying that they've made fair proposals. And this is often just legally coded statements for what may eventually lead to lawsuits. Their quote here saying that it was redesigned from the ground up. The Switch 2 launches on June 5th for $449. I cannot for the life of me think why you would use that phrase. There's nothing here that's been redesigned from the ground up. It is very much from the top down as far as they've made the exact same looking piece of hardware with the exact same general ideas and concepts. Sure, there's different sizes and different hardware internally, but this is not throw everything in the trash and start over. If it was, they would have at least Hall effect Joy-Cons. Epic has acquired the AI-powered 3D asset tagging technology Loki. Once again, this I imagine is going to be used by the Unreal Engine in some way, or the Epic Asset Store. The Australian studio Playside is making layoffs after delivering record revenue. They're just announced a restructuring plan in response to waning contract work, but the news just comes months after it reported record annual revenue of 64.6 million Australian dollars. They made the Dumb Ways to Die game, I assume, which is at least a game I recognize, although that was a long time ago. Disney Codemasters and Jagex veterans have launched an indie publishing label called the Collab. Okay, it'll probably be a while before they actually publish anything now, so you really can't act any further on that. In what seems like a too little too late scenario, parents can now moderate their child's friends list and block specific experiences in Roblox. I still very much don't feel like you should let kids play Roblox, though. It's not really addressing the monetization issues and the encouragement of the thought that you can become a game developer inside the world of Roblox, which is just straight up going to be a lie. Let's see. Craft & Brand's Life Simulator and Zoe is a long-time franchise after it has hit 1 million sales, which, yeah, if it was a fly-by-night game before, I guess they now have to rush to make it a long-term franchise, or at least pretend like they're doing that until they can take the money and run. Although, in fairness, you were going to say that anyways. That there's no way this game would have sold unless you sold the concept that it was going to constantly be tweaked and updated and maintained. And then Nintendo also delayed the Switch 2 pre-orders in the US over Trump tariffs. And that's going to bring us to all the new games on Steam, and if I can burn through this fairly quickly, then I can go back to sleep, and we can also prevent this from being a 4-hour stream. The only thing here is that, again, I just don't know how much curation actually happened, nor do I know how many things I may have missed. But I'm working towards a potential future where every single time I run the macro, I have no errors at all. Which, if I got to that point, that'd be great. More realistically, though, I'm gonna get to a point of having 4 or 5 happen always. Some of that is gonna be just based on how I wrote the code, or how I need to write the code. But yeah. Now that I'm done with taxes, I can't help but feel like I'm going to end up trying to make a new macro for a couple things. Which would have me spending probably too much time programming and not enough time cleaning. A lot of the cleaning and decoloring also has come about from just me calling audibles and changing my mind. Like, I put some side tables in one place, and in retrospect now I want to actually replace the side tables with bookcases, and first thing I have to do there is actually clear the bookcases, and then it will be a question as to whether I can actually move them on my own. And then I'll probably end up putting the side tables where the bookcases are, so I'm just moving things around in my head and just on the whole process. And there's a lot of stuff that is in the way, one way or the other, and that I had hoped I could garage sell a lot of stuff and get rid of it, but at a certain level, it might just get to the point where it's more logical to just throw it all away. Just take a big loss on the whole thing and move forward. Particularly if I can get like all the remodeling done to the point where I wanted throwing away all the extra stuff that I don't want would get me into a much nicer position. Of course, I'm still in a fairly bad position as far as just a lot of uncertainty, and I think this is going to be true for a lot of people. At any point I could, like many people, if things go bad enough, be homeless, possibly living out of a car, or just forced to move. And if that's the case, then I'm going to be potentially just paying people to pack things up for me if there's no real timer there. Yeah, there would be a real timer there. I still wish there was a better way to optimize this whole experience going through Steam games. It's like, it's a little too slow of a process. It's a little too boring of a process. I do want to highlight games, but truth is I'm barely highlighting a lot of these other than to look at them for a brief second before closing them as tabs. Oh, this is not. This is another adult game. Just looked at the thumbnail. Whoops. Yeah, that's just like yet another adult game that either wasn't curated or did not have any tags. Which, yeah, maybe at some point here I really should just not risk it and should straight up make all the curation happen off screen, and then really only highlight this is nothing other than a bunch of images. Yeah, maybe only highlight and show games that I actually care about, or that actually I'm gonna make a YouTube short about. Yeah, at some level, this game's already missing from Steam. It might make some sense to automate the process of making the YouTube shorts. So there's a thought, but that'd be very slow to do it that way. If I was live streaming making YouTube shorts, and the way I'm doing it right now would actually make it look terrible and sound terrible. I'm still also just trying to better find ways to integrate the actions of UI Vision with actions of Advanced Scene Switcher and OBS to make macros and make two things that really communicate to each other much better and much faster if possible. Also, I'm looking towards making it an automatic system that just happens. It doesn't require me to baby it or to even initiate it if possible. Man, I'm really starting to get really sleepy. I have toilet humor today for some reason. Which at some point maybe I need to curate around that. Also, still very much have an oversleeping insomnia combination going on here, where I'm waking up some days and then immediately going back to sleep for way too many extra hours. It's not like I'm feeling amazingly rested at the end of the whole process. And I'm just gonna go absolutely silent here. At this rate, my brain feels like mush. I have like a Korean visual novel from the looks of it. I really am just hoping, can't even say words now, that, is this the last tab, or did we just open the same tab multiple times? Or did my gestures stop working? No, it's straight up the same tab. So my macro broke at some point and just opened this same one, which that implies to me that this link did something or came from some other place. Or am I even accomplishing anything? Let's see, we have a whole bunch of duplicate tabs here. So this is a example, I think, also of where needing a duplicate tab closer is very much required. The good news is that probably means we might be closer to being done than I thought. Bad news is it means I have to be a little bit careful. Come on. Python game. This is worse than most of the times this has happened to, where I've just been incredibly sleepy. I can feel my brain shutting off, and that's kind of how the whole process ends up going, is that my brain will start going into these waves of nearly passing out. Well, good news though, we are done, which probably is bad news overall, because that probably means I missed a bunch of games, considering how many duplicate tabs were open there and how few we actually saw. Noticeably, we didn't have anything particularly interesting announced on Steam, and noticeably my little game I was going to play today to see how many times Naturally South of Midnight came up was incredibly low. So yeah, not a lot of reviews happening for the game or talk about it. Anyways, that's going to be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.